Elias Rain stepped into the obsidian cathedral of silence that was the Virex High Court. Every surface shimmered with void-polished perfection, cold as judgment, unyielding as the doctrine it enshrined. The air was thick, not with sound but with its absence. Where humans might murmur or clear their throats, here the only reply was echo. Every footfall Elias made struck the stone like heresy. He wore Terran black, not as defiance, but in mourning. A diplomat, yes, but one bearing more ghosts than titles. The Virex eyes upon him held no warmth, only calculations. He knew their verdict had likely been written before his shuttle breached orbit. Still he came, because the alternative was war. Because even the condemned must speak. Because someone had to. Elias touched the thin chain beneath his collar. His wife's ring strung beside a data chip of old verses, each encrypted syllable a heartbeat from Illyra. The colony's fall had left him cratered, a man-shaped wound stitched with duty. He had once written sonnets about stars and spring rains. Now, his words built bridges between species that hated what they saw in each other. He stood not just for trade routes and mineral claims, but for the right to feel and name feeling aloud. The Dominion spoke through gesture, expressionless and codified. Poetry was corrosion, emotion a pathogen. And yet here he stood, the last poet in a language of chains, daring to let syllables bleed. Rivkor watched him like one watches fire, entranced, wary, ready to kill. Her armor was ceremonial, lacquered with the black of the Enforcer caste, but her thoughts wandered beyond protocol. She was of the bound, the unseen laborers beneath the Dominion's perfection, and she'd been taught since infancy that human speech was viral. That emotion, once loosed, could unravel entire worlds. But Elias Rain didn't speak like a contagion. He spoke like a wound remembering sunlight. Each word he released chipped at the ice she'd mistaken for conviction. Every metaphor was a fracture in the walls she had spent years polishing. He was dangerous, not because he lied, but because she wanted him to be telling the truth. The negotiation began with controlled civility, resource quotas, orbital tariffs, transit paths. The usual scaffolding. Elias played the game, knowing each phrase was dissected for impurity. He tread carefully, his translator implant, whispering sterile Virex approximations of human intent. But then came the proposal. A cooperative council. Shared oversight. Symmetry. Equality. To Virex ears it was unspeakable. Not hostile. Not crude. Worse. Suggesting harmony through difference. Their silence hardened, calcified. Elias saw it. The tightening postures, the drifting gazes. But he pushed forward, because diplomacy was not peace unless it risked failure. He offered words not as weapons, but as bridges, and watched them burn before him. A metaphor slipped, not planned, not scripted, just truth, rising unbidden. He spoke of invisible labor bound by heritage, faceless and forgotten. It wasn't accusation. It was grief, dressed as verse. But it hit the chamber like a sonic detonation. No voices rose in protest. No fists slammed tables. The Dominion did not rage. It quieted, utterly. Silence is judgment here. Silence is violence. Elias knew, too late, that they had heard exactly what he meant. Understood it too well. The Enforcers did not move immediately. They did not need to. The verdict was already humming through the neural net of the High Court, like a virus searching for patient zero. He had given them fear, in a place where fear had no name. A pulse of blue descended, security drones like polished predators. Riv stepped forward, out of instinct but stopped. Orders rippled through her implant. No intervention. Observe. Obey. They took him standing. No words exchanged. Only surgical precision. The translator was rooted deep, bonded to his cortex and tongue. They pulled it with cold indifference. It exited wetly, trailing static and blood. His scream, silent, unheard, untranslated, was the first human sound ever outlawed by protocol. Diplomatic immunity dissolved like breath on glass. Elias Rain, envoy of Earth, became a linguistic corpse in a hall of sacred silence. The prime harmonist raised one hand, fingers poised in a gesture older than most stars. No deliberation, no record, only ritual, subversion of harmonious thought, confirmed. Punishment, devoicing, exile from expression. His crime wasn't treason. It was metaphor, and metaphor, in the Virec's heart, was revolution. As the court recessed into stillness, Elias knelt not in submission, but in sorrow. His tongue throbbed with absence. His mind screamed poetry the universe would no longer translate. Riv stood as silence reclaimed the chamber. Her orders were clear: monitor, contain, record deviation. But something in her had shifted. Something cracked. Elias had spoken of bondage. Carefully, gently, but precisely. And though he hadn't known, he'd spoken of her mother, of the bound. He hadn't planted a virus. He'd unearthed the truth. Now her silence was no longer allegiance. It was uncertainty. And uncertainty, among the Virex, was the first betrayal. In a hidden relay chamber buried beneath Virex stone, Mira Fail watched the footage stream in. She lit a cigarette she wasn't allowed to have and whispered the words no one else would record. We feared they wouldn't listen. We feared they'd ignore him. But what happened was worse. She leaned closer to the black box mic, eyes burning. They feared him not because he lied, but because he spoke too truly. We sent a poet to speak peace. They broke his voice, and they taught us what fear sounds like. The feed cut. The silence remained. Chains clicked in rhythm across the crystalline thoroughfare, echoing like a dirge. Elias Rain walked upright, neck straight, wrists bound in silver steel. Around him, the citizens of Virex stood in ordered rows, eyes sharp, mouths sealed. Silence, their sacred scripture, was weaponized now. He did not scream, did not weep. He offered no protest. He met their eyes, and that was worse. His stare did not accuse. It witnessed. Calm, unblinking, human. No defiance, yet no surrender. Each micro-expression, regret, resolve, the faint ache of mourning, sliced deeper than volume ever could. The Virex turned away, disturbed not by violence, but by something subtler: endurance. The enforcers flanked him like statues. Elias walked as if he still had something to say, even stripped of voice. A flicker of jaw tension here, a slow blink there. His presence became a silent sermon of pain unforgotten. He was no longer just a prisoner. He was a mirror. Across the city, screens pulsed with state-approved caution. On them, Elias's Terran past was played like a fever dream. Debating councils, chaotic markets, crowds cheering in dozens of dialects. Children watching were told to fear audio corrosion, the descent into entropy caused by unstructured thought. To the Virex, emotion was contamination. Control, their cure. Humans are screamers, the broadcast repeated. Their language infects reason. Their faces betray instability. Yet when Elias appeared, calm, shackled, yet unreadable, he did not fit the narrative. He wasn't erratic. He didn't beg or threaten. He simply existed with terrifying precision. And silence, when chosen, became rebellion. A voice might be contained. A gaze could not. Judgments pulled children closer. Drifted in sovereign officials increased neural a monument forged from crystalline alloys, and still in the hollow whispers without sound passed from citizen to citizen. Orbiting arcos like unfrozen screen. Why does he look whole? It shimmered with the fear was no longer what he might Triarch Dominion. It was what he had already etched glyph. The cell was small, bare and glowing strut. Words didn't live there. It was not merely a station. Elias, it was ideology against the orbit. Every surface glinted with imperium, not random, reflecting back the light of 1,000 subjugated cultures. A breath and a nod. The Dominion the prisoner across law should not merely govern, then return to pulse. Inside, clumsy, vaulted chambers echoed real with ceremony. A language began polished silence, enforced by neural dampeners, echoes in flesh and bone. Here, others joined. Justice had been distilled. A twitch of the foot meant agreement. Tribunals were not held for truth. Elias didn't lead. For the roaring applause, his motions offered no commands, only invitations. From above, The stars
breathed
watched
memory
in their ancient
into muscle.
indifference. Guards
From
watched,
below,
but
the
dismissed
planet
it as
Arcos
coping.
cast
They did
its
not
storms
understand the
toward the
virus
void.
they feared had
Between them
already
hovered a
evolved
tribunal
beyond
built
sound,
not to
beyond
hear,
control,
but to be heard.
Each gesture was
And
defiance,
today,
woven
Earth would be
in muscle
remembered
memory,
or erased.
Each pause, chains
a
clinked
punctuation,
like punctuation
mark of quiet
as Del
rebellion.
Raines was
And as
led
silence
through the
turned to
tribunal
syntax,
spectacle.
Elias
His gait
smiled,
was uneven,
not in triumph,
but not uncertain.
but in remembrance.
Each limp
Even
letter
here,
language
sentence
sentence written in
Even here,
defiance.
he was not alone.
His face bore
Rivcore
Dominion
observed for the tower
craftsmanship,
surveillance
a
line,
half-healed
pulse
interrogation
steady,
scar
but
that
thoughts
traced the
tangled.
arc of a
Protocol
once passionate
said Elias
speech
was a
silenced by force.
His memories, they had tried to
Unfiltered,
erase him. His
but
nature,
even
disordered.
silence can hold
Yet the man
shape.
she watched
He
now
wore no
was
regalia
not
now.
chaos. He was
Just the
method,
neutral gray
intention,
of planetary
a
custody.
fire wrapped in
But the
calm.
eyes behind
When she
the
walked
wound
past the
remained
plaza
clear,
where children
unbroken.
gathered to receive
In his cuffed hands,
doctrinal play education,
hidden in the folds
something
of
stopped
procedural
her.
linen,
They weren't
he held
playing
a fractured
Dominion-approved
ceremonial
logic
tablet.
games.
Shard,
They were
the
moving,
original Earth
oddly
Dominion
synchronized.
Not a legal
A raised
tool.
hand, a
turn
turn
of
of
the
the
head.
head. He raised
Tapped
his
his
mimicking
head
heart
as the
chamber came
She
into
froze.
view.
Above
Elias's
him hung
movements
hollow banners of
replicated
past
in
Dominion
miniature.
triumphs.
Children
edited
copying meaning they
truths
couldn't
glinting
name.
like knives.
They called a play.
Before
She called
him,
it dangerous.
thrones of
And still,
obsidian and
she didn't alert command.
And around him,
She watched.
the laughter
Her
of the
faith,
powerful.
once
The
crystalline,
triarchs
began to
descended,
fracture.
Each in a
Elias
flourish
had no
of light
voice,
and
yet he reached
phenomenal
the
dominance.
Not with
Archon
rebellion,
Lurex
but with
Varn
pattern.
led,
With
clad in
remembrance.
sentient
He didn't
silk
fight
that
them.
pulsed with
He
every
showed them.
word he spoke.
And in her silence,
his voice
a
rose
new
not
question
in anger,
emerged.
but
What if
indulgence,
control was the lie?
as though addressing
deep in the
a
Virex
misbehaving
understructure.
pet.
He
Mirafale
called
worked
Del
fingers
a
over cracked
curiosity,
keys and
an anthropological
protocols.
remnant.
Then
Surveillance
accused him of
feeds
disseminating
scrolled past
illegal
faster
poetic
than eyes
constructs.
should follow.
Verses
She
that
followed them
undermined
anyway.
loyalty.
In each sector
conditioning
Elias had
among the
passed
lesser
through,
species.
a pattern
Screens
emerged.
flashed,
Increased
distorted
neural
fragments
interference
of Terran
reports,
resistance
clusters
poetry,
of silent
twisted
congregation,
into nonsense.
fluctuations in
one verse
biometric
morphed
uniformity.
into a dance meet.
No screams.
Another was underscored
No
with
speeches.
sound effects,
Just
meant
mimicry.
to ridicule.
Children
Such
tapping
dangerous
tables
syllables.
in unison.
Lurex
Workers
purred.
pausing machinery.
Such
at
rebellion
identical
in
intervals.
rhyme.
Entire
Entire
laughed,
courtyards
but
frozen
Del said
in
nothing.
mirrored
He
stillness.
stared at the floating
Mira
lines
leaned
of
closer.
corrupted verse.
The data wasn't
Not
just
with regret.
strange.
With
It was
mourning.
recursive.
Aaron Toval,
a new language
sat behind
behavioral,
a wall of translation
embodied,
drones.
viral.
Her robe
And at
marked
its
with
root,
the glyph
Elias.
of clerical neutrality.
He wasn't escaping.
She was invisible
He was
by
evolving.
design. The Dominion
A transcriber
silence
without
had no wall.
opinion.
Elias
A
had
lens
turned it into
without
a drum.
memory.
Mira
But within her
uploaded
neural
a silent
interface,
report.
a private
One line only.
library bloomed.
He's not alone
Hidden
anymore.
among court records
The High
were
Council
Terran
could
poems,
not allow the infection
manifestos,
to grow. Words could be
forbidden
silenced.
treatises about agency,
But Elias,
compassion,
he taught without
dissent.
them.
They
She watched
invoked
Del not as a
directive null,
defendant,
but as a
thought
signal.
reclamation. His presence
5 cycles
defied
remained.
the
Elias would
algorithmic
be
quiet
transferred
of the
to Chamber
tribunal.
Theta.
His silence
where
rang
identity
louder than
was
most
deconstructed.
verdicts.
Memory
As the
parsed,
indictment
filtered,
grew more
purged.
theatrical,
Survivors'
her
fingers
fingers
trembled slightly
emotionless,
over the input
functionally
glyphs.
obedient.
She did not
Not
record
reformed,
every
emptied.
insult.
Elias was
recorded
told
the
nothing,
moment his knuckles
but Riv heard it
whitened on
through the
broken
internal
shard.
relay. She was not
She
the
watched
only
him
one
as
watching,
guards brought
but she was the
rations.
only one remembering.
As he traced
with a flick of his
invisible
wrist,
lines on the
Del
floor with
lifted
his
the
heel.
object that had
He seemed to know.
survived Earth's
He didn't
fall.
panic.
A
Ceremonial
ceremonial
shard.
He taught harder.
Marble from the Earth
Gesture,
Dominion Treaty
rhythm,
signing.
breath.
Once embedded
His
in the
eyes
walls
met
of the
hers
Terran
once.
consulate on
No
Galdas
plea.
Prime.
Just the
Cracked
echo
during
of
the
the
assault.
unspoken.
Smuggled
I know
out
it comes.
during the
Riv
firebombing
turned away,
of the embassy.
but the echo followed.
He held it not outward,
She knew now,
but against his chest.
Elias wasn't trying
Dominion
to survive.
guards had scanned it.
He was trying to
laughed.
leave
A
behind
primitive
something
relic
that could.
allowed
Each
through
cycle
as a token
blurred
of
into the
futility.
next. But the
Elias
shard was
etched
not
time in
inert.
gestures.
Its engraved
Foot taps,
clauses,
finger drums,
shimmered with
half
old
blinks.
code. The others
Language
followed.
written before
Not
Dominion
many.
revisionism.
Enough.
Before
He
censorship
drew patterns
protocols
in the
learned
dust.
to forget.
Diagrams
Its
of
fracture
thought,
line
movements
curved
tied
to the exact
to emotion.
trajectory of a
A
severed
dance without
alliance.
music.
Del
a
ran
grammar
his
of
thumb
rebellion.
along it.
He did
as
not
if
speak of
invoking
escape.
memory.
He
He
spoke
said nothing
without
as he
words,
raised it into
of
view.
memory,
Its
of identity,
surface catching
of
stories
tribunal
that
light.
lived in
Hollow
the
recorders
joints and
zoomed.
lungs.
Commentators
need
chuckled.
sound.
Somewhere,
Somewhere,
a
a
popular feed,
even the guards,
labeled
the image,
jaded and
petty
numb,
planetarian
began to
displays
shift differently.
martyr.
As
But
if
Aaron
uncertain
gasped.
whether their posture
The
was
glyphs were
truly
glowing.
theirs. The moment
Elias
arrived
marked
with the
each
weight
cycle
of ritual,
not as a
by
countdown
custom
to erasure,
intoned
but as
Archon
another
Varn.
stanza
The
in a
accused may
poem offer
of
final
resistance.
words before
5
sentencing.
days.
We
That was all.
anticipate, but
Great
language had
sorrow,
always
some
lived
nostalgic
longer than the
pleading,
bodies that birthed
and perhaps a
it.
whimper
The morning
for
before
mercy.
transfer,
He waved a
the
jewel
prison
hand.
district felt
Let the
heavier.
relics speak.
Unmarked,
Dell did not bow.
unnamed.
He did
The
not
crowd
thank
gathered.
him.
Instead,
Not marching.
he spoke
not
in
chanting.
Dominion High script,
Just still.
a language
by
most
one,
humans could
arms
not
rose.
pronounce, let
Heads
alone
bowed.
weaponize.
Fingers tapped
the dialect
stone,
used
railings,
in ancient
armor.
treaties,
A beat,
long before
a
the
pattern,
empire rewrote
no
its
voices,
own myths.
no signs.
I invoke the final
Only
reckoning,
motion,
he
the
said,
rhythm of
a
something
pause.
remembered.
Then chaos.
Guards activated
Laughter
stone
erupted.
pulses.
Somewhere,
Drones
someone
deployed
spilled
sonic
wine
barriers.
glass.
Nothing
One
worked.
triarch held
There were
with
no
the lead.
targets.
Varn leaned
Only
forward
synchronized
to light it.
flesh.
The right of
Some prisoners
oratory
mirrored
combat.
Elias's
You would
gestures.
challenge a tribunal
Others
verdict
innovated
with poetry,
expanding the language.
He clapped mockingly,
evolving it.
By all
This
means,
wasn't protest.
entertain us.
It was evolution.
The first lines
a dialect
felt quiet,
of defiance
measured,
born from
rhythmic,
absence.
anchored
a child
in
outside the
dominion
prison
cadence,
copied
an ancient
in
linguistic
nearby
form
word.
designed to
A guard
nest in
flinched.
neural folds,
Another joined.
to echo
Then the
across
drones
memory
panicked.
cycles.
Neural interference
It was how their
surged.
ancestors
Protocols
once cast
failed.
law.
Still, no one
not
screamed.
as ruling,
Not one
but
word
as
was
binding
spoken.
truth.
But the riot
laughter
roared in
faltered.
silence. Dell's voice
Emergency
was not
quorum
angry.
was
It was
called
ceremonial.
under red protocols.
The air around him shifted.
The council chamber,
not by volume,
normally
but by
austere,
frequency,
buzzed with unspoken
intonation
dread.
tuned to the
Elias had
Dominion's
not uttered a
own
word in
archival
days.
resonance.
Yet the city
the
writhed
kind
with
used in
synchronized
coronations,
motions,
patterns
in succession
and light,
oaths,
in breath,
in declarations
movement.
of galactic
The infection
war.
was
Each
not
word
in the sound.
landed like a stone
It was in
against
structure.
the walls.
He
of
had turned
denial.
silence from
In the
submission
third row,
into
a
syntax.
young functionary
The
began
harmonists
to weep,
argued
unsure
over
why.
action. Aaron's
Immediate
eyes
deletion,
widened
neural
as the phrases
vaporization
aligned
with
permanent
forgotten
quarantine.
precedents.
But none of
Obscure
its answered
codes
the real
buried
fear.
in pre-imperial
Why are they
memory
following
vaults.
him?
The
A
final
silent
reckoning
man should
was
inspire
not just
nothing.
speech.
Yet they moved like
it was
he
invocation.
moved. Not
Varn's
because he
smile
controlled
began
the
to
twitch.
because he
Dell
reflected
took
something
one step
they didn't
forward,
know they had
then
lost.
another. And behind
as
his
the council
voice,
stared
something
into the
began to
surveillance
stir.
feed.
The
Elias
voice did
sitting
not
cross-legged
rise in
in his
anger.
cell.
It began as a
unmoving,
whisper, surrounded
the
by
sort that
others
slipped
mirroring his
beneath
pose.
the skin.
One
Not
truth
through
settled
volume,
like ash.
but shape.
He wasn't spreading
rhythm,
corruption.
Old
He was
and
revealing the
unfamiliar,
silence,
yet
was
instantly
already broken.
recognized by
The
those
tray was
bred
placed
to
with the
forget.
same precision.
There was once
as
a songbird.
always.
Dell
An exact
spoke
centimeter from
in
the
cradle
edge of his
tones
cell
of dominion
bench.
ceremonial
Nutrient
cadence.
ration center.
It was caught not
But this
for its
time,
feathers,
Riv's
but its
hand
voice.
hesitated.
The
Not
masters
long.
gilded
Not
its
enough
cage
for a
and
camera
silenced
to
its
notice.
song with pain.
Just long enough
but in
for a flick of a
time,
wrist.
it learned to
Two
hum
fingers
through its
swept
wounds.
upward. The laughter that
like
had
flame.
moments before
The
danced
Virex
across the
sign
chamber
for
now
silent
stalled,
fear.
clumsy,
And hidden beneath
and
it, a
incomplete.
twist.
The
A
cadence
forbidden
was
counter
ancestral, a
They
pattern
fear your
once
silence
engraved
more
in
than your
genetic
voice.
memory.
Elias
The kind
saw
that
it.
activated
He had watched her
protocol
closely for
that
days,
summoned the instinct
as one
to
might
listen.
study a dying
Dell's
star
words
for
curled
signs of
through the
rebirth.
tribunal.
When her fingers
Bypassing
shifted,
pride,
he
and
tilted his
mocking
head.
and neural dampers
Not
away.
much. Just
The
enough
bird was
to
told its
acknowledge the
voice
truth
had
now
no
shared.
value.
Riv
That
didn't look
harmony
away.
belonged
A
to
crack
its
had
captors.
formed in doctrine,
So it learned a melody
not from argument
no
or
jailer could
rebellion,
name.
but from
Even
witness.
Varn blinked. Not defiance,
And Dell
but
continued.
recognition.
Not
The
to
tray
protest,
slid away.
not to
She
beg,
walked out.
but to
But the
weave.
echo of that
Not a
gesture
fence,
lingered.
but
Not
an
a command,
incantation
a confession.
of memory.
They
buried
feared not
deep.
what he had said.
It was not
They
defiance.
feared what he had taught
It
them
was
not
returned.
to say. The chamber grew uneasy. Not visibly, but deeply. Spectators shifted without knowing why. Something in the rhythm, the pitch, the unthinkable familiarity of the Terran voice. It didn't belong to him, and yet it did. Lurex Varn's smile faltered. The archives were cold, buried beneath encryption that hadn't been touched in generations. Mira bypassed the protocols not with brute force, but with poetry, lines of Elias's old verse stitched in a bypass code, metaphors as keys. There, in a quarantined manuscript marked heretical by 5 councils, she found it, a prophecy written in fractured Virex and a dialect that no longer officially existed. A chaos tongue, it called it. A language that had once unraveled a silent regime. It had begun not with speeches, but with rhythm, with gestures, with meaning that could not be sanctioned. She cross-referenced patterns. The old symbols echoed Elias's recent movements, his syntax of silence. The Virex hadn't forgotten language. They'd buried it, and now it was clawing its way back, guided by a Terran who had never known their gods, but somehow spoke to their ghosts. Mira closed the file. The prophecy was a metaphor. It was blueprint, and Elias, voiceless and caged, had become its living stanza. Dale nor breathed in dust and damp and digital rot beneath the capital. He lived among outcasts and seekers, trading pages for protein packs, ideas for spare batteries. His cache was forbidden. Ancient human literature, banned Virex philosophy, songs that once echoed across streets before they were labeled subversive. He knew the names of emotions even his parents had forgotten how to speak aloud. When the name Elias Rain spread through whispered channels, Dale traced the rhythms described. Head tilts, hand placements, mirrored stillness. They matched the old patterns he had only read about. This wasn't rebellion. This was remembering. He pinned Elias's prison location on a stolen map. Not to rescue him, to witness, to learn, to ensure others could remember too. If Elias was extinguished, his meaning couldn't be. Dale would see to that. He wasn't a soldier. He was something worse for an empire of forgetting. A historian with a memory too long to silence. Commander Yask stood beside four corpses. Each body had the same odd tilt to the head, a subtle hand position at death. Mimicry, not defiance. Contagion. He didn't believe in language infection. He believed in the certainty of elimination. Subtlety breeds rot, he said to no one. Doubt bleeds more than wounds. Orders were signed, sealed in blood. Guards who mirrored gestures were terminated. Administrators who hesitated were reassigned, then removed entirely. Civilians caught practicing the rhythm Elias taught were designated fractal disruptors. No trial, just erasure. Yask moved faster than the council. He knew the council still debated, still hesitated. He didn't. Elias wouldn't spark rebellion. Not if the embers were drowned in time. In a corner of the cell, Elias stared at the wall. A faded stain curved along its edge like a child's unfinished drawing. His mind drifted backward. Sunlight on Illyra, the smell of spiced fruit, his daughter's laughter echoing in the colony square. She had written her first poem on a touchscreen, tracing words with sticky fingers. It wasn't good. It didn't matter. She had shaped meaning. Now Elias scratched a poem of his own, not with words but with form, lines and loops, curves and angular fragments. A fusion of Terran glyphs and Virex sacred geometry. Not readable, understandable, a bridge between species and script. It told of loss, of hope, of things that refuse to die. He pressed deeper with each curve, his fingers raw, the wall beginning to bruise with meaning. He could not sing his daughter's name, but he could write what she left behind. And in doing so, he would not forget. The wall bore more than scratches now. It carried stanzas in stillness, layered with intention. A poem shaped in silence, visual rhythm crafted to bypass surveillance. Riv traced the markings in the dark, her breath caught between fear and awe. He explained through gesture, motion, expression. No speech, no need. She understood. Each line bled emotion. Each shape throbbed with memory. She memorized it, not out of rebellion, out of necessity. Graffiti bloomed overnight, in forgotten tunnels and market alleys, on food crates and the backs of ration slips. She painted the symbols by hand, disguised as maintenance routines. The message wasn't in the lines, it was in the act. A shared poem, a collective wound, a language of ghosts and grit. Riv, once the watcher, had become the whisper. Elias's voice, now hers. Tracings of the silent poem spread like fungus underfoot. Dale distributed them with care, folded into recycled data slips, stenciled on discarded transport shells. Children drew the curves in chalk. Market vendors etched them into bread crust. It wasn't defiance. Not yet. It was memory. He called it shape song and taught anyone who asked. The patterns told no orders. They asked questions. Who are you when your words are stolen? What do you remember when silence falls? Even the cautious ones couldn't help but hum the curves with their eyes, fingers twitching unconsciously. The streets began to pulse, not with noise, but with understanding. A rhythm the Empire could not name, and therefore could not kill. A single firewall blinked red, then collapsed. Mira didn't wait. She wiped the terminal, torched the access point, and ran. Drones hissed through tunnels behind her, scanning for thermal traces. Her encryption had lasted longer than expected, but not long enough. She vanished into substructure ruins, layers of civilization buried beneath Virex crystal. Her breath burned. Every echo could be her end. Yet she smiled. She carried a copy of the poem, a code embedded in it, a map to Elias's holding corridor hidden beneath its stanzas. Mira had no orders anymore. No backup. No time. Only one mission. Reach the poet before the last line was erased. The council gathered behind sealed walls. Their decree bore no sound, only glyphs etched in blood steel. Order 13. Mimicry equals rebellion. Rebellion equals eradication. Any citizen echoing the diplomat's gestures, rhythms, or script would undergo memory strike. full neural fracture. No clemency. No review. The screens across the Capitol lit up in red. And then fell dark. Citizens stopped moving. Not in compliance, but in terror. Even silence, once sacred, became poisoned. Mothers held their children's hands a little tighter. Vendors blinked twice instead of once. A gesture erased could still be remembered. Elias had taught them one thing the Dominion never accounted for. Silence wasn't obedience. Sometimes it was waiting. The riots began not with screams, but with stance. Circles of people stood in alleys, in parks, in train corridors. No words, just motion. One by one, arms rose. Fingers traced glyphs into the air. Legs shifted in synchrony. A language of breath and pose. Guard deployed with stun batons and sonic suppressors. But there was nothing to strike. No chants, no slogans. Just bodies moving like thought. They were never trained for this. They shouted orders, but no one broke formation. A rhythm spread across the Capitol. The poem had learned to walk. The order was clear. Final processing. Riv accepted the assignment. She wore her armor. She saluted. She entered the cell. Elias met her eyes. No question passed between them. Only recognition. She bound his hands gently. Walked him through secured corridors. Monitored by 6 drones. Then turned left where right was expected. Down an abandoned conduit. A dead system never reactivated after the last uprising. They passed shattered lights, exposed wiring, silence thick as prophecy. Judgment at the zenith drifted in whispered what only he would understand. A monument forged from crystalline alloys mined. They tried to erase us, but we remembered ourselves. Orbiting arcos like a frozen screen, she activated the override. It shimmered with the encoded laws of the Triarch Dominion. Not escape. Each etched glyph, but one more stanza, each glowing strut of verdict. The council sat before surveillance feeds, flickering ideology in orbit. Entire sectors now glinted with choreographed defiance, reflecting back the light of 1,000 subjugated cultures. A gesture the Dominion believed a replicated line, not merely a prison mural now traced by inside. The shape of a memory that refused to be forgotten. Polished silence in breach of century dampeners of Virex harmony stood. He spoke. Justice had been distilled. He gave a meaning. The word tribunals were not held for truth, but for spectacle. They could purge the roaring applause, but not the message. Elias Rain had done what none thought possible. The stars had taught the silent to listen to themselves. From below, and now the planet was Arcos cast its storms already toward the void. Elias between them hovered a tribunal built twice that of Earth. Forced low by pressure and shame. Earth would be remembered, coiled around his limbs, chains clinked like punctuation above Del Reigns was the memory chamber tribunal spectacle. Its ceiling alive was uneven dampeners that shimmered like liquid obsidian. Each limp letter in a sentence. The chamber curved in perfect geometry. His face bore designed to crush deviation. A half-healed interrogation scar that traced around him stood the once passionate speech, faces hidden beneath silence. They had tried to erase their stillness, but even silence can hold shape. No name was spoken. No regalia. No charge was read. Just the neutral gray of planetary custody. He stood the eyes behind billions and remained clear, but none like him. He did not tremble. Hands, he carried his memories like procedural linen. Illyra, he held a fractured ceremonial the cratered earth behind his shard of the original Earth. They believed silence, not a legal tool, but he had already broken it. He raised his head as the chamber came into view, and now above him they gathered to erase the meaning they feared most. Edited truths glinting on the outer edge of the Capitol's decaying infrastructure. Thrones of obsidian Mira adjusted the final relay node with the laughter of the power, fate, and the Triarchs descended. Sparks danced, each in a frequencies collide. Dale whispered an old line from Archon Lurex Varn. The stars will carry clad in sentient silk, and the screens came alive with every word he spoke. Across Virex, his voice rose not in anger, corridors, but indulgence. Even command posts, as though addressing broadcasts flickered from rigid propaganda. He called Del a curiosity. Elias's anthropological remnant unraveled, then accused him of disseminating illegal poetic constructs. Curves bled into lines. Verses that undermined flashed in cascading frames among the lesser elders gasped. Screens flashed, distorted for guidance, Terran resistance poetry. There was no sound, twisted, only motion, nonsense. Only memory. One verse more, each stanza unveiled a wound. Another was underscored with sound effects. The Empire had to ridicule. The city did not dangerous speak. Syllables. It watched. Lurex heard. Elias' silence had found its voice. The
and
crowd
it now
laughed,
echoed from
but Del said
every
nothing.
screen the
He stared at the
Dominion had
floating
once
lines
controlled.
of corrupted
No
verse.
final words were granted.
Not with regret.
No last
with
request
warning.
offered. Aaron
The chamber
Tobel
expected
sat behind
nothing
a
from
wall
man
of translation
already
drones.
condemned.
Her
But
robe
Elias
marked with the
moved.
glyph of
He raised his
clerical
hands
neutrality.
slowly.
She was invisible
deliberately,
by design, as though lifting the
transcriber
weight
without
of a
a
dead
opinion.
planet. A
He
lens
traced the
without
sky with his
memory.
fingers,
But within her neural
mapped
interface,
flame in the
a
air,
private
and
library
stumbled
bloomed.
backward as if
Hidden among
consumed.
court records
His
were
movements
Terran poems
told
of
Illera,
manifestos,
of forbidden treatises
fire-swallowing
about
homes,
agency,
of
compassion,
screams buried
dissent.
under collapsing
She watched Del
stars.
not as a defendant.
He knelt, but as a
arms
signal,
reaching for someone
his presence
gone,
defied
cradling air,
the algorithmic
trembling,
quiet,
then
of the
rose
tribunal.
one step
His
at a time,
silence rang
shaking.
louder than most verdicts.
Each motion carved
as the
grief
indictment
into the
grew
space
more
between
theatrical.
watchers. He
Her
showed them a
fingers
father
trembled
torn
slightly
open,
over
a piece
the input
betrayed by
glyphs.
silence. She did not
He
record
danced
every
war into
insult.
memory.
She recorded the moment
genocide
his
with
knuckles
hands.
whitened on
No
the broken
voice.
shard. No sound.
She was not the only one
and yet,
watching.
in that
But
dance,
she was the only
he
one
made
remembering.
tyrants remember
With a flick of his
what they had
wrist,
spent
Del
centuries
lifted the
denying.
object that had
Suffering has
survived
shaped
Earth's fall.
Grief has
a
rhythm,
ceremonial
and
shard.
truth.
Marble from the
Unspoken
Earth Dominion
through
Treaty
silence.
signing.
Cannot
Once
be
embedded in the
silenced
walls
again.
of the Terran
The
consulate
Virex
on
elites
Galvatron.
watched, cracked during the
Expressionless
assault,
behind their veils.
smuggled out, but their
during the
bodies
firebombing
betrayed them.
of the
A
embassy.
twitch of a hand.
He held it not
a shallow
outward,
breath,
but against his
one
chest.
blink too slow.
Dominion guards
Another
had
too
scanned
quick.
it, laughed.
Elias's
A primitive
gesture
relic,
language,
allowed through
once
as a token
dismissed
of futility.
as Terran heresy.
But the shard was not
bypassed defense
its engraved
mechanisms with
clauses
elegance.
shimmered
It did
with
not
old
demand
code.
obedience.
Language written
it
before
revealed
Dominion
understanding.
revisionism.
Before
And understanding
censorship
was
protocols
lethal.
learned
The
to
performance
forget.
was
Its
not
fracture
accusation.
line
It was
curved in the
reflection.
exact trajectory.
One
of
harmonious
severed
lowered
lines.
his veil an inch.
Del
Only
ran
to
his
quickly
thumb along
lift it
it,
again,
as if
but the
invoking
damage
memory.
was done.
He
He
said
had been
moved,
nothing as he
not
raised it into
convinced,
view,
not converted,
its surface
but
catching
cracked.
tribunal
in a place where control
Hollow
was
recorders
measured
zoomed.
in stillness.
Commentators
These
chuckled.
tremors were
Somewhere,
tectonic.
a popular feed
Elias had
labeled
resisted.
the image.
He had
Petty
translated
planetarian plays
pain
martyr.
into clarity. But Aaron
In
gasped.
clarity,
Once
the glyphs
felt
were glowing.
could not be unfelt.
The moment arrived
Commander
with the
Yask
weight of
stepped
ritual.
forward,
By
ceremonial
custom,
blade in hand.
intoned
Its
Archon
edge
Vaughn.
shimmered with
The
neural
accused may
disruption,
offer final
capable
words
of severing
before
not
sentencing.
flesh,
We
but
anticipate
voice.
great sorrow.
He offered it to Riff,
some
kill
nostalgic
him,
pleading,
and walk free,
and perhaps a
his
whimper
silence
for mercy.
crusade. He
Or
waved
fall
a jeweled
beside
hand.
Let
Riv's
the relics
fingers
speak.
closed around the
Del
hilt.
did not bow.
Heavy. He did not
Warm
thank
for his
them.
grip.
Instead,
For a heartbeat,
he spoke in
motion
Dominion
ceased.
high script.
Even Elias,
a language most
stopped
humans
breathing.
could not pronounce.
She turned,
let alone
stared at him.
weaponize.
Not
The
as a
dialect
prisoner,
used in
as a
ancient
person.
treaties.
And then she did
long
what
before the
no
Empire
virus
rewrote
station
its own
had done in
myths.
7 centuries.
I invoked the final
She
reckoning.
spoke.
He said.
One word,
A pause.
one syllable,
Then chaos.
It wasn't
Laughter
defiant.
erupted. It was
Somewhere,
true.
someone
the chamber
spilled a
cracked,
wine glass.
not in sound,
One triarch
but in
howled with
disbelief.
Varn
Riv
leaned
stepped
forward,
between
delighted.
Elias,
The
and
right
the
of
executioners.
oratory combat,
blade lowered.
You would challenge
Voice
a
unshaken.
tribunal verdict.
The watcher
with
had chosen
poetry.
not obedience.
He clapped mockingly,
not rebellion.
By all
but
means,
truth.
entertain
And in doing
us.
so,
The first
she
lines
shattered
fell
the
quiet,
ritual from within.
measured,
The silence
rhythmic,
trembled.
anchored in
Drones
Dominion
hovered midair,
cadence.
unsure.
An ancient linguistic
Guards
form
froze,
designed to nest
waiting
in
for
neural
orders that would not
folds
come.
to echo
The elites
across memory
exchanged
cycles.
glances.
It
But
was how their
glances were
ancestors
no longer
once
enough.
cast law.
Riv's voice had
not
broken
as
more than
ruling,
protocol,
but as
it had
binding
ruptured
truth.
certainty.
The laughter
The second
faltered.
voice,
Del's
might
voice
have
was
followed,
not angry,
but it didn't
It was
need to.
ceremonial.
Instead,
The air
body
around him
shifted.
shifted.
A ripple
Not by
through
volume,
ranks,
but by
through
frequency.
generations.
Intonation
A soldier lowered
tuned
his
to the
rifle.
Dominion's
A
own
harmonist stepped
archival
back from the
resonance.
dais.
The
The
machine
machine powered
used in
down.
coronation.
This was not collapse.
In succession
It was
oaths.
recognition.
In declarations
That
of
silence,
galactic
weaponized and worship,
each word
had
had
landed
landed
like
like
a
a
stone against
They were
the
not
walls of
watching an
denial.
execution.
In the third
They were
row,
witnessing
a young
an
functionary began to
and
weep,
maybe
unsure why.
the beginning of
Aaron's
something else.
eyes widened.
Across the
as
Capitol,
phrases aligned
broadcasts
with
of Riv's
forgotten
defiance
precedents,
ignited
obscure
like
codes
fire
buried in
through
pre-imperial
oxygen
memory
star
vaults.
blocks.
The final
Her
reckoning
voice,
was
that
not
single
just
syllable,
speech.
replayed
It was
again
invocation.
and again.
Varn's smile
Not as
began to
audio,
twitch, but as
Del
action.
took one step
Children
forward,
raised their
then another,
arms the way she
and
had.
behind his voice,
in colonies
something
across the
began to
galaxy,
stir.
Terran's
The voice
mind
did
or
not
final
rise
posture.
in anger.
Amphibious
It began as a
cultures
whisper,
flicked their
the
gills
sort
in
that
response.
slipped beneath the skin,
Insectoid hives
not through
pulsed
volume,
through the
but
chitin.
shape.
Each
A
blink
rhythm,
and echo.
Old and
Entire
unfamiliar,
cities moved
yet instantly
in coordinated
recognized
rhythm.
by those
not
bred
rebellion,
to forget. forget.
Resonance.
There was once
They were
a
not
songbird.
protesting Elias.
Del spoke.
They were
in the
becoming
cradle
it.
tones of
The Virex
Dominion
could not name
ceremonial
it.
cadence.
But it had already
It was
spread
caught not for
beyond
its
language,
feathers,
but its
Mira,
voice.
watching
The
from her
masters
hidden
gilded
terminal,
its cage
whispered
and
through
silenced
gritted
its
teeth.
song with
We
pain.
thought we were
But in
containing
time,
infection. It learned
turns
to
out
hum
we were
through its
bottling
wounds.
light. The
And
laughter
now
that
was
had
everywhere.
moments before danced
Elias's
across the
final
chamber, now
gesture
stalled,
trembled
clumsy,
at the edge of
and
completion.
incomplete.
One final
The
arc,
cadence was
one final
ancestral,
set,
a
and
pattern
then his
once
knees
engraved in
He
genetic
collapsed
memory,
like a pillar undone.
the kind that activated
Drones surged
protocol
forward,
that summoned
not
the
to
instinct
rescue,
to listen,
but to finalize.
Dell's words curled
Medical
through the
bots
tribunal,
buzzed,
injecting
pride
compound
and mocking
theta
and
neural
a
dampeners.
virus engineered
The bird was
not
told
to
its
kill,
voice
but
had
to
no
silence.
value.
The
That harmony
surgical
belonged
burn
to
of
the
the
speech
captors.
centers. So it
He
learned
would
a
live.
melody
He
no
would
jailer
think,
could name.
but he would never speak
Even
again.
Varn blinked. The chamber flinched
Dell
as one.
continued,
Not out of
to
pity,
protest,
out of panic,
not to beg.
The Dominion
but
had
to
just
weave.
created its first
Not a
silent
defense,
martyr,
but an
and that silence
incantation
would
of
speak
memory
louder than
buried
any
deep.
scream. It was
Elias
not
lay
defiance,
still,
but
his
his
fingers
return.
moved.
The chamber
to his
grew
chest,
uneasy, to the ground,
not visibly,
then to the
but
empty air
deeply.
above.
A final
Spectators
gesture,
shifted without knowing
heart,
why.
earth,
Something in the
sky,
rhythm, connection,
the pitch, the
root,
unthinkable
reach.
familiarity
His voice was
of the Terran
gone,
voice,
but not his message.
It didn't belong to him, and yet it did.
Lurek's Varn's smile faltered. The watchers in the chamber felt it, not in ears, but in memory. He was not broken. He was transformed. No word passed his lips, but his meaning struck deeper than sound ever could. A new kind of language had been born, and with it, the certainty that even erasure could not stop what had already begun. Mira uploaded the full black box journal to the hypernet. No encryption, no delays. Elias's thoughts, the prison's rhythms, the visual syntax, the poem. Within hours, it reached the colonies, then allied worlds, then beyond. Each species interpreted it through its own sense systems. Humans wept. Insectoids danced. Amphibians blinked entire conversations. Silence stopped being absence. It became echo. Not everyone understood the poem, but all of them felt it. A man who had lost everything still chose to create, to remember. And now, billions remembered with him. Elias had never screamed, but the galaxy had heard him. Inside the inner sanctum, Virex leaders trembled. The harmonists debated under silence veils, but the tremor was in their eyes, not their tongues. Half demanded lockdown, total purge, scorched infrastructure, memory redaction. The other half wept. One tore his veil away and whispered, "What have we become?" No one answered, because answers required belief, and belief had fractured. The doctrine of stillness, of purity through silence, it had held for millennia. But now, across the city, their people did not march. They mimed. They remembered. They became the poem. Yask, defeated, fled into the city's underbelly. He had erased hundreds, but not Elias, because the Diplomat's virus wasn't biochemical. It was mnemonic, a contagion of understanding. And now, Yask, once executioner, carried it in every doubt that stirred his hand. Elias walked out of the chamber, speechless, unbound. No one stopped him. Beside him, Riv matched his pace. Guard watched. Drones hovered. None moved. The plaza beyond the gate was full. Thousands stood shoulder to shoulder, unmoving. Then, as one, they raised their hands. Heart, earth, sky. The final gesture of a man who had no voice left. They did not chant. They did not cheer. They remembered. The Virex Empire did not fall that day. Its ships still flew. Its leaders still sat. But its silence had changed. No longer a cage. Now a choice. And across the stars, a quiet storm gathered. It carried no sound, but it would never be unheard. The Virex Empire did not crumble with noise. It unraveled in silence, thread by thread. Colony governors declared independence with nothing more than raised hands. Statues of harmonists were pulled down, not by mobs but by dancers. Movement replaced obedience. Murals bloomed where propaganda once stood, rendered in riotous color, and ancient glyphs resurrected from ash. Across city walls and ship hulls, the poem repeated, not in text but in gesture. They called it the Reclamation Wave. 1,000 years of repression exploded into stories, art, and unsanctioned memory. And somewhere in the void between what was and what would be, silence stopped meaning fear. It meant space. It meant possibility. It meant the voice of a people finally learning to listen to themselves. Elias Rain returned to Terran space under escort, bones weary, voice gone. Medical scans confirmed the damage, his speech centers obliterated by engineered viral filament. But his silence didn't grieve him. It had already become language. His final act had traveled faster than war, cutting across light years and suspicion. In insectoid archives, his poem pulsed in chromatic wing movements. In amphibious courts, it became ritual breath. Among Terran youth, it replaced anthem with rhythm. A single diplomat, broken and unbowed, had sparked a movement that not even extinction could silence. He never begged. He never shouted. He remembered, and that memory became universal metaphor. Truth does not need sound. Rivcourt stepped onto the makeshift platform. Lights dimmed, crowd holding breath. No armor, no orders, just her body, her silence, and a story she had waited her entire life to tell. Her hands moved, slow, deliberate, sculpting memory in the air. She became fire and betrayal, cradle and revolution. She danced the fall of silence and the rise of meaning. The crowd never clapped. They wept. They mimicked. They remembered. An enforcer reborn as a storyteller. The first Virex in generations to perform truth aloud. Not in voice, but in rhythm. And her defiance, one word spoken against centuries of doctrine, became the first note in a chorus that would never be quiet again. Mira Fail sat beneath a dozen alien eyes, light of galactic justice cold against her skin. She offered no opening speech, only evidence. Her footage lit the chamber. Elias's silent dance, the riot without voice, Riv's final no. The silence in the tribunal was not sacred. It was shaken. They called human screamers. But what echoed now was silence shaped by choice, not fear. The footage became curriculum. Mandatory viewing for all first contact units, coded in every diplomatic archive. They feared what Terrans might say. Now, they feared what Terrans might mean. Elias did not retire. He did not vanish. On a Terran orbital academy above Mars, he became the teacher none had expected. He instructed through holography, gesture, and tactile feedback. Students studied the art of pause, the science of silence, the truth between movements. Each lesson held the weight of memory and the beauty of resilience. Future diplomats learned to feel a message before speaking it. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. Where the Virex High Court once ruled in shadowed silence, now stood a sculpture, massive, impossible to ignore. Interlocked hands, human and Virex, forged in alloy and etched with poem glyphs. They formed a single Terran word. Remember. No translations were offered. None were needed. The sculpture was tactile, accessible. The blind could trace its shape. The voiceless could feel its weight. It told the whole story. Of a poet who lost everything. Of an empire undone not by war, but by memory. Of silence repurposed, reclaimed, reborn. Even centuries later, pilgrims came, not to worship, but to understand. The monument never spoke, but always said enough. Across ungoverned space, in forgotten mining colonies and fluid harmonic reefs, the poem survived. Miners tapped it in wrench rhythms. Amphibians hummed it underwater. Insectoid hives blinked sequences to one another, grief and light. It mutated. It adapted. It breathed. Children in unaligned systems painted their walls with fragments. Explorers carried it into the void, whispering meaning to machines. The Dominion once called it contagion. They were right. But it was not a plague. It was a song, sung without sound, burning through the dark. Elias stood before the monument. Older now, movement slower but never less precise. He raised a hand, touched heart, touched ground, touched sky. The gesture remained. 3 motions, infinite meaning. Behind him, a group of students mirrored him. Virex and Terran, insectoid and amphibian, no longer enemies, not yet equals. Just listeners. He turned to them, fingers twitching, a line of verse shaped in muscle memory. Only he remembered it. But he would teach them, not with speech, with presence, with pause, with everything that still remained after voice was taken. He did not mourn the silence. It had never been absence. It had been space, waiting to be filled with something honest. He did not speak. He never needed to. His silence was the story. Exactly one galactic cycle since the fall of enforced silence, the stars pause. No transmissions, no speeches, just motion. They call it unspoken day. Across Terran outposts, Virex settlements, and alien metropoles etched in atmosphere and ice, beings gather, not to shout freedom, but to feel it. No one talks. No one needs to. Hands rise. Bodies sway. Patterns unfold in shared choreography. 3 simple motions: heart, earth, sky, memory in motion. A poem never recited, yet universally remembered. On the fringes of known space, even those untouched by war now participate. It is not tradition. It is communion. In every hush, Elias Rain is present. Not as martyr, not even as symbol, but as proof that meaning does not die when speech is taken. It transforms. From the void beyond charted space, a ping slices through the black, a frequency older than most stars, wrapped in mathematical humility. No origin, no signature, no voice. Until now, the signal decrypts itself across thousands of languages before settling into 5 human words. We've seen your silence. We wish to learn your voice. They are synthetic, long thought inert, survivors of collapsed machine networks, drifting like ghosts between radio noise and gravity wells. Not hostile, not allies, observers. And now they respond, not to firepower, not to diplomacy, but to absence filled with meaning. A Terran ambassador, hands trembling, plays the message again. No deviation, no noise. Machines once believed emotionless, now asked to learn. Not our weapons, but our silence. From the observatory deck orbiting a reborn Virex capital, Mira and Riv stand side by side. Stars blink like Morse across nebulae. Machine signal pulses rhythmically, deliberate and curious. They're not asking to speak, Mira murmurs. They're asking to understand. Riv nods once, her fingers drifting into the old pattern. This was never the end. This was prologue. The Virex had feared corruption. The Dominion had feared language. But what Elias offered was not contamination. It was translation. Now even the machines listen. And where once stood an empire of silence, there stands an invitation. We armed ourselves with fleets. We trained in war and worried about peace. We thought we needed guns. All we needed was a man who wouldn't stop speaking, even after they took his words. He didn't lead armies. He led memory. He didn't break their silence. He changed it. And now the stars pause once a year, not in mourning, but in meaning. Across empires, species, and signal spectra, they remember one thing: that the quietest voices endure the longest, because silence, when chosen, can be the loudest fire of all.